Tell me, what exactly is the function of a rubber duck?
You are no son of mine.
Look, on its face, this is a ridiculous claim to make, and there is a reason for that. Arthur is a fun-loving guy who loves the simpler things and would be content just playing in his garage. And Barty Sr., he's a very aspirational person and a very strict rule follower. And throw in the fact that Arthur was in Gryffindor, and while we don't know what house Barty Sr. was in, between his ambition and his pure blood, I think it's a pretty safe bet to say he was in Slytherin.
Pretty obvious.
Not that that's necessarily a bad thing either, but it does bring us to our first similarity between the two characters, and that's that they're both purebloods who fight against Voldemort and his movement that purebloods should be the ones who should rule. You know, both of them could just stand aside and let Voldemort win, and they'll be fine. And sure, you could argue that maybe Voldemort wouldn't forgive because of all the Death Eaters that Barty Sr. could be responsible for imprisoning or even killing, and that the Weasleys are the biggest bunch of blood traitors ever, but even during the Battle of Hogwarts, he gives Neville the chance to join him, knowing all the trouble that he's given the Carrows for the past year. So, really, both Arthur and Barty Sr. live the quote, "All it takes for evil to win is for good men to do nothing." Now, I hear you saying that's surface level, and it is. You know, Dumbledore, Sirius, already said Neville. There are plenty of purebloods who fight against Voldemort and the Death Eaters. I mean, what else am I going to say here? That they both work for the Ministry?
An astute observation has led to laughter.
Well, yes, they do both work for the Ministry. It's more how they work there that's similar between the two of them. They're both the heads of their departments and are, let's say, flexible about the rules that they're responsible for. As head of the Auror Department, Barty Crouch Sr. allows for the use of the unforgivable curses by his Aurors, and this is obviously morally reprehensible, and the best of his Aurors, Mad-Eye Moody, refuses to do it. However, Arthur writes a law about Muggle artifacts that allows for a wizard to enchant a car just as long as he doesn't intend to fly it. And yes, it's played for a joke, and even Arthur says, well, the wizard would still have been better off telling his wife, you know. But at the same time, Harry and Ron then take the Anglia and are seen by Muggles with it, risking the statute of secrecy. And yes, the action, of course, it's not as bad as allowing for the killing curse to be used or allowing for torture, but the results could be so much more catastrophic for the wizarding world. Worst case, it's war between wizards and muggles without end. At best case, it's kind of like the mutants in X-Men. You have the governments of the world trying to record every witch and wizard as they try to take advantage of their power, leading to a pureblood purist then rallying more wizards to say, this is why we have to rule over muggles, and then you would have kind of a civil war happen as you have a more pro-muggle wizard having to try to defend everybody so that there can be like equal grounds between muggles and wizards. And of course all of this then assumes that the muggles don't create something like sentinels, leading to a full-on apocalypse. All that for a flying car, huh? But back to the original claim, that Barty and Arthur are pretty much the same character, at least to their core. And so far I've really only looked at them in a professional capacity, a little bit of background I guess, but let's look at their personal lives. Let's look at how they act at home. Barty obviously has problems at home because of how much he works, or at least that's his reputation after everything starts to fall apart for him. And, you know, his relationship with his son is, how do I put this? Bad. Well, I am great at descriptive writing, aren't I?
You stink, loser!
Anyway, though, Barty Jr. falls in with the Death Eaters at a young age when his father is one of the leaders in the fight against them, and, you know, to the world, he just seems to be a good man who is raising a son who manages to get 12 OWLs. But he's probably pressuring his son to do this, or at the very least is using his influence to get him a time turner, because that's the only way that Hermione was able to take 12 classes her third year. Now, I'm no therapist, but I think it's pretty safe to say that part of this for Junior is resentment. Also, he just straight up says that he and Voldemort share a bond because they both hated and murdered their fathers. And yet, at the same time, Barty Sr. very much loves his wife and grants her final wish, and This is another example of him using his power and influence to bend the rules a little bit. Or at least that's what the public thinks. They think it's just, oh, his wife wants to see her son one last time before she dies, so Barty just pulls some strings and they get that opportunity. But the reality is, he's breaking the law for her. In no way is he doing this for his son. He keeps his son under the Imperious Curse for years because he doesn't trust him. And why should he? He is a very dangerous prisoner here, and tortured the Longbottoms into insanity. Barty Sr. knows very well what his son has done, and wants him to be punished, but he loves his wife so much that he grants this last wish for her. Now, how can Arthur be similar to this? He's got 7 kids and has great relationships with all of them. Well, except for one.
I happen to be a school prefect.
Yeah, old Weatherby, Percy, known fertilizer inspector, assistant to the regional manager, and another Hogwarts student who gets 12 OWLs who grows to resent his father and what he means to the Ministry. And at the same time that Percy is starting to resent his father and what he believes his reputation is doing to his career prospects, Arthur is just as firm in his beliefs, to the point where the two get into a shouting match over Percy working for Fudge. Now, I'm not saying that one of them comes across looking better than the other here. Percy is obviously out of line, but Arthur has to be the grown-up in the room here. This is him talking to his son, and there is a way that he can approach this, but the way that Fred and George describe it, he does not look good here. He came home really pleased with himself, even more pleased than usual if you can imagine that, and told Dad he'd been offered a position in Fudge's own office. Really good one for someone only a year out of Hogwarts. Junior assistant to the minister. He expected Dad to be all impressed, I think. Only Dad wasn't, said Fred grimly. So obviously this is a third-party retelling of the story, but let's try to think of this from Percy's point of view here for a sec. To me, it seems like right now he is on top of the world. All of the hard work he's put in at Hogwarts is paying off. He's been cleared of all wrongdoing for what happened with Barty Sr., This is everything that he has wanted for years, and even if Arthur approaches this in a gentle way, it's going to upset him because he's going to think that his father doesn't really believe in him. But Fred's voice is described as grim here, so Arthur is not being gentle about this. You know, he's worried about himself, he's worried about his family, he's worried that Fudge is trying to turn his son against him. These are all logical things to think, but he's not going about this the right way if Fred is describing it as grim here. And Ron then says that Percy went completely berserk here, but as mature as he seems, you gotta remember that Percy here is 18 years old. He's still a dumb kid. Now, I've been defending Percy a lot in this video, so I'm gonna spend a little time here trying to give Arthur some leeway as we think about how this conversation could have gone in the best case scenario. Like, let's say Percy's coming home, you know, he's over the moon. I'm the new junior assistant to the minister. He's really happy, and Arthur's kind of just sitting there like, really? After everything that happened with Barty Crouch last year, they're giving you that position? And, you know, then he probably says something about, I don't know, Percy, I don't think you should take this. Fudge isn't really to be trusted. Then they probably argue about Voldemort and whether or not he's back for a little bit, as Percy's siding with the Prophet and Fudge, even though his dad knows the truth. And, you know, he maybe even gets frustrated because Percy knows Harry. You know, he lived with him for 3 years, so it's a weird thing in the story that happens, but it does show how families can be destroyed by this stuff. But let's say this keeps happening, and then Arthur, either most likely out of frustration, just kind of goes, look, Percy, I don't think you should take this. I think Fudge is just trying to use you to get to me. And then Percy just goes completely berserk and says something to the effect of, I worked hard for this, I earned this, and what makes you so important? You know, like, you are not that important. If you were that important, we wouldn't have been so poor all the time. And then it's just, all bets are off, and, you know, they're just having a row like none other. And in defense of Arthur here, this is a really hard thing to hear, especially coming from one of your sons, but Again, Percy's 18 here. He's a dumb kid no matter how many OWLs he's gotten. Arthur is the one who kind of needs to take a step back here, be the bigger person, and just say, hey, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to imply that you don't deserve this job. You deserve this job. Fudge doesn't deserve you. I just think you should be more careful here. And maybe Percy listens, maybe he doesn't. He's still pretty angry about everything. Again, 18. But, you know, it's not the first family destroyed by politics. It won't be the last. But either way, because of this argument, Percy and Arthur don't speak to each other for 2 years and don't reconcile for another year after that. And then there's Ginny. Now, I'm not saying that her and Arthur have a bad relationship. I'm sure it's a good one, you know. I can't think of any reason why it's not. But there is one interesting parallel between her and Barty Crouch Jr. and what those two have done or could mean to their father's reputations. After he is sent to Azkaban, Barty Jr.'s actions reflect on Senior's ability as a father, which then hurts his career aspirations, you know. He's picked to be the next Minister for Magic because he handles the war. People think he has great ideas, you know, he's popular.
Right!
But after, everybody just looks at him and starts to blame him for what his son did. You know, people say, Barty spent too much time at work, you know, that's why his son did what he did. Maybe if he was at home more, Barty Jr. wouldn't have joined the Death Eaters, you know. He's not popular anymore, and with it, no chance to be Minister for Magic. And with Ginny, this parallel comes in with the Chamber of Secrets. Obviously, she gets her hands on Tom Riddle's diary because Lucius Malfoy gives it to her, but why does he give it to her? You know, even if he's just trying to get rid of it on this specific day, hey, there's that Muggleborn that Draco's been complaining about all year. Or even better, there's Harry Potter. But he gives the diary to Ginny, so there must be a reason why. And I think that reason is because Arthur is performing raids. If he comes to Malfoy Manor, he will find dark illegal artifacts there, and if the diary ends up in Dumbledore's hands, a connection to Voldemort as well. So Lucius has to get rid of the evidence, and at the same time, he needs to destroy Arthur. Now, killing him is the obvious and wrong way to do it, you know, cut off one head, 2 more take its place. No, he has to destroy Arthur's reputation so that he can send a message to anyone who may come after him that if you come for me, it's not going to end well for whoever replaces you. If Ginny is the one who is caught opening the Chamber of Secrets and kills Muggleborns, it's not only going to destroy their family and she'll spend the rest of her life in Azkaban, it is also going to reflect on Arthur as a parent, as all people will say about him was, oh, that poor girl Ginny Weasley, maybe if her father wasn't away performing so many raids, she wouldn't have opened the Chamber of Secrets. Now at this point, I'm sure you're wondering why I'm making this video. What led me to make this connection? Am I trying to rehabilitate Barty Sr.'s image? Am I trying to dunk on Arthur? Honestly, I just like the quote from Sirius that the world isn't separated between good people and Death Eaters, you know? And at the end of the day, I'm sure he would disagree with me on Barty about this, but I think this is just 2 people trying to do the right thing who have a weakness for power and are stubborn in their beliefs, you know? It's why Harry is so special at the end of the day. The world isn't black and white, it's mostly gray, you know? Maybe a man in a million could bring together the Hallows. I don't think that Arthur or Barty could, but, you know, it doesn't mean that they're not good people who are just trying to do the right thing, who sometimes come up a little short, you know. And to quote the great UCLA basketball coach John Obi-Wan Gandalf, it is our choices that define us far more than our abilities. Why didn't I include Dumbledore's name in there? Man, I really am a bad writer, but either way, it's why in the fandom Arthur is generally loved, and why Barty Sr. is... You know, I don't know, actually. Let me know down in the comments what you think of Barty Crouch Sr., or if this video has changed your mind on him at all, or even if it's changed your mind on Percy. I'll admit, I see him much more sympathetically now after this video than I did before, you know. Just kind of thought he would have been under the Imperius Curse, but I think the reconciliation has more meaning if he wasn't ever under the Imperius Curse, but, you know, either way, if you've stuck around this long, you probably enjoyed the video a little bit, so please drop a like if you did, subscribe if you want more like this, and I'll see you next time on STV.